is a bit of a reading from Sidney Bechet's book, Treat It Gentle. And this chapter is called The Second Line, and it's an excerpt from the second line chapter. There was another kind of bucking contest too. There'd be those parades of different clubs, and oftentimes it would happen that 2 or 3 clubs, they would be parading the same day, and they'd have engaged these different brass bands. Alan's brass band, it was one that was very well known. The Onward, that used to be another. The Excelsior, that was one. And those bands, the men in them, waiting for that parade to start, they'd all have that excited feeling, knowing that they could play good, that they were going to please the people who would be about there that day. They had no fears, but the musicians from other bands that had just been gotten up for that day, they were just a bunch of men who could play, they were just a bunch of men who was going to play, and that was a difference. And that was a difference. They wouldn't have the same sure feeling inside. Bands like the ones I named, they were organised, and they had preferences at these club parades. And those clubs, maybe the Lions or the Oddfellows, or the Swells or the Magnolias, the men who were their members, they'd all have their full dress suits on, with sashes that would go down to their knees. And they'd have this Grand Marshal, who was the leader of the club. He'd have the longest sash. He'd have a sash that would go right down to his shoe tops, and it would have golden bangles on it. And on his shoulder he'd have an emblem, maybe a gold lion. That was his badge. But most of all, the way you could tell the marshal, it was from how he walked. The marshal, he'd be a man that really could strut. It was really a question of that. The best strutter in the club, he'd be the Grand Marshal. He'd be a man who could prance when he walked, a man who could really fool and surprise you. He would keep time to the music, but all along he would keep strutting and moving so that you never knew where he was going to be doing next. Naturally, the music, it makes you strut, but it's him too. The way he's strutting, it gets you. That's what you want from a parade. You see, you want to see it as well as hear it. And all those fancy steps he'd have, oh, that was really something. Ways he'd have of turning himself around. People, they got a whole lot of pleasure out of just watching him, hearing the music and seeing him strut, and other members of the club coming behind, strutting and marching, some riding on horses but getting down to march a while, gallivanting there in real style. It would have your eyes just the same as your ears for waiting. And people everywhere, they'd be coming from every direction. They'd just appear. It was like Congo Square again, only modern, different. The times they had changed, but the happiness, the excitement, that was the same thing all the time. And so these parades marched along. You'd be in the band for this one club, say. You'd be stationed to somewhere at a certain time, and another band, it would be stationed at some other place, maybe somewhere almost on the other side of town. And the time would come you'd have fixed to start both, and you'd move off and start by going to some member or other of the club's house, stopping off there for a drink or a talk, or to eat and have a little bit of fun, and then go on again. The other band, it would be doing the same. Both of you would be moving to the meeting place, and the people, they'd be up by Claiborne Avenue and St. Philip. They'd know you'd be coming there. You had to pass sometime. It was a parade, and you'd be going to where the people were, because naturally, if you had a parade, you were going out to be seen. And you timed it to reach there the same time as another band. And that's where all hell starts, because if 2 bands meet, There's got to be this bucking contest. The way it was fixed, one of these bands, it would stop, face around and then go up close to the other, go right through it, one band going uptown and the other downtown. The Grand Marshal, he would be leading the club, and when he got to some corner or some turn, he would have a way of tricking his knees or turning all around, prancing. He'd fool you. You wouldn't be knowing if he was going left or right. Oftentimes the second line, running along after the parade, they'd go completely right after he'd twisted left. And that was a big part of him. And that was a big part of it. Him stepping and twisting and having you guessing all along. The way he could move, that was doing something for you. He led it. And people, they'd be singing along, dancing, drinking, toasting. That marshal, he'd lead the club's band up to the other one, and the leader, he would go through with him. Manuel Perez, for example, he had his onward band. Other bands, they'd tremble to face him. A brass band, it was 20 pieces, you know. The leader, he'd take his band right in amongst the others, and he'd stop. You'd be standing there on Claiborne Avenue, and the bands would come closer to each other, keep on coming closer, and you'd hear the two of them, first one in a way, then the next. And then they'll get closer, and you couldn't make them out anymore. And then they'll be right in together, one line between another. And then it was all just noise, just everyone all at once. There'd be 14 instruments all bucking at one another. And then you'd have to catch your breath. They'd be separating themselves. Then came the beauty of it. That was the part that really took something right out of you. You'd hear mostly one band, so clear, so good, making you happy, sadder, whatever way it wanted you to feel. It would come out of the bucking contest, and it would still be playing all together. None of the musicians would be confused. None of them would have mixed up the music. They would all be in time. And that other band, getting scared, knowing it couldn't go on further, it was finished. It couldn't be trying any harder. It was there still doing its best. But hearing the other band, say some good band like the Onward, it had thrown them off. It wasn't a band anymore, it was just some excited musicians. It would have 3 or 6 different tempos going. The men, they didn't know their music, and they didn't know their feeling, and they couldn't hear the next man. Every man, he'd be thrown back on his own, trying to find whatever number it was they'd started out to play. But that number, it wasn't there anymore. There was nothing to be recognised. And the people, they just let the band be. They didn't care to hear it. They'd all be gone after the other band, crowding round it, cheering the musicians, waiting to give them drinks and food. All of them feeling good about the music, how that band, it kept the music together. And being able to play in that kind of band, it was more than learning kind of thing, you know. When you learn something, you can go just as far. When you've finished that, there's not much else you can do unless you know how to hold of something inside that isn't learned. It has to be there inside you, without any need of learning. The band that played what it knew, it didn't have enough. In the end, it would be confused, it was finished, and the people, they could tell.